I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how to make some silicone tape if you are going to work on the no-show thong and you've got some fabric that curls a little bit along the edges and you don't want it to do that. This silicone tape will kind of go on the wrong side around the curves and around the top and prevent some of that curling. And it actually kind of helps keep the undies in place as well. So the first thing you're going to need is some wax paper. Any brand will work just fine. You're going to need this silicone tube, and you can get this at Lowe's or Home Depot or probably just about any hardware store. It just says 100% silicone. They usually use it as sealant in the bathroom or the sinks or tubs or something like that. It's really easy to get, and I think this was $4 at Lowe's. And then you also want some masking tape or painter's tape. The masking tape works just fine. It's super cheap. So you've got your thong cut out, and you're going to set that aside. You're not going to use that yet. And actually, when I cut it out, I made tiny little snip marks on the curve right at about that location, because I don't need that silicone tape from here down, because that's going to be sewn in. And so I made just a tiny itty bitty little mark right there, so I know when to start the silicone tape coming around. And then I also made a tiny little itty bitty mark about here, and I can measure that because I also don't necessarily want that silicone tape in this general area, if you know what I mean. So that is, oh, my ruler's broken, but it's about 4 inches, maybe 4.5 inches up if you're measuring from there. That's where I made that little mark. And I don't know if you can see that right there. It's right there. So from here down, I'm not going to add silicone tape, but we'll get to that part next. The first part is just getting a straight line of silicone tape that we can put across the whole top. That's kind of a long way to go in one strip, so I'm probably going to install it half and half. So I'll make a piece of silicone tape that goes to about here, and then I'll make another one for the other half. Alright, so I've got a piece of wax paper, and I've laid out 2 strips of the tape. Mine is too wide, it's just what I had in my toolbox. You can use the narrower tape if you want to, it's fine. But it should be about 1/4 inch in width in between. So then you just take the silicone tube and you squeeze it out. Comes out pretty easy, I just gotta get it going. And there's kind of a fine line, and you'll get a feel for how much to squeeze out on there. You probably want enough that it makes a pretty good piece of tape. So right about there, that's fine. So then I've got this laid out. If you have a little bit of water, you can put your finger in a little bit of water and get it a little bit wet, and just take this and just smooth it out. So it's kind of smooth. You see how it's getting smoothed out? I got a little lump there. And you want it to be about as even as you can get it. And like I said, it really does help to get your finger a little bit wet and smooth it out. Now the next thing you're gonna do is wait for 1 minute. So set your timer on your phone, wait for 1 minute, don't do anything yet, and after a minute, we're gonna peel these 2 pieces off. All right, so it's been a minute. I'm gonna peel these 2 edge pieces off, and I'm just gonna throw them away. You could try to reuse them if you want, but they got silicone on them now, and so they're kind of messy. And if you're running low on tape, you can reuse them after they've dried, but it's kind of a mess, so. All right, so now, oh, and look, I've got some of it right here. So I've got that done, and I've let that sit. I let it sit for a minute, and I pulled the tape off. So now I'm going to get my fabric, oops, lay it out on the wrong side. I have silicone over there, I don't want to get everywhere. So I'm going to lay it on the wrong side, so the wrong side's up. And I'm just going to take my silicone tape that I have made. Can you see it on there? It's a nice straight little piece of silicone. So I'm just going to take it, flip it upside down, and put it down on the top edge of the fabric all along that little edge. I ended up doing a little more than half. Alright, so then I just press it down and smooth it out again. It'll be nice and smooth, it'll be so pretty. And now we wait for 2 minutes. So set your phone timer, wait for 2 minutes. Alright, so it's been 2 minutes, And now we're just gonna peel off this piece of wax paper. Oops. Alright, so now you're just gonna make another straight line for the other half of the top. So I'm gonna skip that part and I'm gonna move on to teach you how to do the little curve part. But just finish out and go all the way across the top. You don't actually have to start right. I mean, you could start right at 1/4 of an inch in, since that's gonna be in the seam allowance, but it's not a big deal. So we're gonna finish out the top and then we're gonna move in and I'm gonna teach you how to do like a little curved piece. Okay, so to do the curve, remember that we made little notches here and a little notch here because we really don't need the silicone to go above or below that point. I'm just gonna take something that kind of gives me a guideline, and I'm just, actually, the pencil's not even writing on it, it's just scratching on this wax paper, but it gives me an idea of the curve, and it doesn't have to be exact, but we're only going to there, so I'm gonna mark that out. So from there, and there's my curve. So draw that out, and then move your fabric off. And if you're doing this before the top is dry, be really careful because that's not dry. That actually, the top piece that you already did, it actually takes about 30 minutes to an hour to dry completely. So it's gonna be super sticky right now. So if you're doing this curve and you're working on this part while that is still drying, just be aware of the fact that that's gonna be really sticky for like another 30 minutes to an hour. So be real careful with that. So we're moving that off to the side now. Don't need that. So now we've got our little curve mark, and all we have to do is make a little piece of silicone tape that is kind of in that shape. So I'm just gonna take the painter's tape. Oops, it just got stuck everywhere. And just tape around that. And so it's not as clean and pretty as the straight one, but it'll be fine. All right, so I've taped out my curve, and you can see my masking tape's a little messy, but it works. The bottom curve is pretty easy to tape out without taking out snips. And the top curve, I just actually snipped that and it made a nice little curve. So once that's done and I've kind of got that lined out, I'm just gonna do the silicone like I did before. Spread it on there. Wet my finger with some water from the tap or your sink or whatever, it doesn't matter. And spread that silicone out. Then we do the same thing. We let it dry for 1 minute. We peel the tape, put it on the curve of the undies with the leg curve, and then wait for 2 minutes and peel it off. All right, so I have drawn out, taped out, and then laid down the silicone and waited 1 minute, and then I pulled the tape off, and then I'm going to flip it over. One thing that I forgot to mention earlier is when you're tracing out your curve, you've got to do the opposite side. You've got to do one leg and then the other leg is the opposite type of curve. And so when you do that, if you trace it with the right side up, you'll end up pasting onto the other one that you didn't trace. I know that's a little confusing, but you'll see when you get there. So I traced the one that I was looking at on the right side when the garment was right side up. So that means when I flip it over, I'm going to be adhering it to this side. Anyway, that's how that goes. So I'm going to just get that back on there. I'm going to look for this little snip that I made, which is right here, tiny little snip. That's where that starts. Lay that down. Slowly come around. Make sure you get that silicone tape right on the edge. This time I put another little piece of wax paper underneath because it can get kind of messy. I'm going to press that down, make it nice and smooth. And then I'm going to sit, wait for my 2 minutes, and then peel it off, and then we're going to let that dry. While I'm waiting my 2 minutes for this side to dry, I'm going to go ahead and tape out the other side because we've got to do the opposite leg, and so you've got to tape it out on the opposite side. Does that make sense? You've got to tape it off on the opposite side of the of this wax paper and make a little curved piece that goes on this other side. So while I'm waiting for that 2 minutes, I'm going to go ahead and just tape out the curve for the other leg while I'm waiting. So I've waited the 2 minutes. I've taped out my opposite curve, so it's ready to peel off this side. Just be really careful because gosh, it's so sticky. So if this upper part isn't dry yet, this bottom part's gonna be super sticky, or the upper part's still gonna be sticky. So that's done. So now I kind of just need to set this aside a little bit, and we're gonna do this opposite curve. So now I've still got some residue on the side that I just peeled off. This is the new side. So I just make sure I set that down on some wax paper so it doesn't get all over my workspace. So I set that down there, that's totally fine. You could actually take another piece of tape and put it on the back side if you wanted to totally cover it up. So now I'm gonna make my other silicone bead on this side. I'm gonna wait my 1 minute, peel off the tape, flip it, and install it on the final leg. Okay, so it's been the 2 minutes and I'm peeling. If you peel too early, too much of the silicone tape is gonna stay on the wax paper and not enough is gonna stay on your undies. So don't peel too early. All right, so I peeled that out. So now I have it across the top, and I have it from mark to mark, and I've got the tape. So just let it sit and hang out for about 30 minutes to an hour. You could come back and check on it by just lightly tapping on the tape, and if it's super sticky and it doesn't feel dry, it's not dry. It'll still have some grab to it even when it is dry, but it won't feel sticky, so that's the difference. So once that's done and you've got that tape installed, now you just go through the directions and follow the directions to finish putting together the thong. Thanks, guys.